tell you that we're recording the podcast, this particular webinar. We think it's going to be great to be able to share that content beyond today. So please be aware of that. So let me get started. Rachel, I'm going to come to you first of all. Why do you think it's so important to tackle this conversation?
Thanks, Lisa. Oh, privileged to go first. I think for EW Group, as we're a consultancy advising businesses on inclusive practices, for us, this topic is fundamentally, of course, it's about respect and valuing difference, but I think moreover, it's about recognize each of us individually and businesses recognizing that there are patterns in the society in which faiths, recognizing how that plays out for individuals in terms of faith and religion, so that we can acknowledge and understand and celebrate people's beliefs. We advise organisations on all types of ways in building inclusive working cultures, and that's for the benefit of employees and for the growth and sustainability of those businesses. So inclusion, as I'm sure everybody on the call knows, inclusion is a multifaceted thing. Okay, it's where each of us aren't limited to one particular characteristic or identity type. I identify as a woman. I'm from the north of England. I'm a parent. All of those parts of my identity intersect and overlay with each other. And I think that's the most important, in a way, aspect to inclusion is that understanding of the complexity and the nuances of it. So faith and religion are really key to understanding intersectionality because of the way they interplay with other identity types. So I'm sure everybody on the call will know that to be Jewish is to be ethno-religious, which means it's both a faith and an ethnic group, which is is quite a unique thing. If you're a Black woman who is a practicing Muslim, you then have in essence 3 layers of identity type playing out. And that in the workplace and in life, I'm sure we can all appreciate, creates a compound disadvantage, the layering of identity types. In that example relating to race, gender and religious beliefs. So I think for me, the religion and belief topic becomes very potent when you think about intersectionality and how it plays out. So for us and for me, what's exciting about this is working with organisations to develop practical skills. What can we help people say and do in the day-to-day in the workplace to take account of difference and develop a really sharp analysis of difference and how this plays out and impacts individuals.
Yeah. And those practical tips is definitely something we're going to get to a little bit later on in the conversation so that people can walk away with some tangible actions that they could take today, tomorrow. So that will be really interesting to hear, Rachel. Thank you. And the intersectionality element, I think, is so key. And Abid, I'd like to bring you into the conversation here. I think, that's probably something that you can talk to really strongly, I think, particularly with your British Asian community. But, let's hear from you in terms of what you think.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having this call and well done. I think it's fantastic and some great fellow panelists as well. So the British Asian business community, one out of my own frustrations. I'd been with the IoD for about 4 years, and I was struggling to understand why there weren't many Asians within the West Midlands. And when I made inquiries, they suggested that maybe the Asians weren't joining. So it wasn't the fault of the organization. However, people were not taking to the organization and people weren't joining. So I think it transpired that, it would take an Asian to attract Asians. So we trialed that back in December and it's been incredibly successful. We've had loads and loads of Asian businesses join from all faiths, so Sikhs, Muslims, Hindus, and it's been really, really positive. I mean, it's still a progress. We're still learning, and being people of color ourselves, we are still learning as well. Other faiths accommodate other faiths. But your whole question within 2023 on talk about inclusivity, diversity, about inclusion. Sometimes I feel it's just a tick box exercise rather than something that we are actually focused on. And I think we talk about it, it will become a norm. I mean, people, in this day and age still ask, is a cabbage halal? Or are you going to stop for 30 days? Are you fasting for 30 days? Does that mean that you won't be eating for 30 days? Back when I was in junior school, if someone asked me that question, it was acceptable. But now in 2023, where there's so much knowledge available, so much information available, we preach and we bang on about inclusivity, we talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion. Unfortunately, we're still none the wiser. Yeah. So for me, that's a massive challenge. How do we get this message across, and how does it become the norm that Mohammed will be fasting or Abid will be fasting? And I think the more we talk about it, I think the more we'll get the message out there.
Yeah, so that focus on education, being able to really help inform, and not always just posting out there, people doing their own research and education. If they have colleagues that they think maybe celebrating Ramadan at the moment, they need to do their own research, I think, sometimes, and not always just wait for people to tell.
I mean, in this day and age, this year, I think we're on the 6th fast today, and I've been asked already twice by people that, will you be starving for 30 days? And I'm thinking, well, when I was 9, 10, 11 in school, and people asked that question, I couldn't understand it because it was a new thing. But, in 2023, where knowledge is so vast and there's so much information available out there, and I would have thought and hoped that it would have been a normal practice now.
Yeah.
Where there's still a lot of confusion about it.
Definitely. Akil, I'd like to bring you in now. So that idea of, the literacy of understanding, why religious, paying attention to it is important. I'd love to hear your views on that.
Well, thanks for having me, Lisa. And well, look, I mean, it's what Abid and Rachel have said is completely correct. It all makes a lot of sense. The fact is, it's really important, and it's not actually just about. For me, it's not just about the kind of like it's a nice to have, or it'd be helpful if people understood different kind of communities. There's actually a bigger point to this, which is society has changed. If I go back to when I was a young boy in the 70s, no one knew what Ramadan was. So we have progressed to the extent that now we have Ramadan lights in London, we have iftars happening at football clubs, etc. All of those. I mean, all of these things are happening now. So there has been some kind of progression. But why has there been that kind of progression? And it's not been because people have become more interested, or they necessarily, or it's because that they feel that it's the right thing to do. A lot of it has happened because demographically, there is no option. So if we look at the society that we're in, and if you look at the changes that we're going to see coming over the next 20 to 30 years, the Oxford Centre for Migration Studies tells us, and they love me quoting this, by the way, because they're always saying to me, we get no money for you constantly quoting our data. But in the next 20 to 30 years, they talk about in Western Europe, but in Britain in particular, countries like Britain, France, Germany, etc. We're talking about 20 to 30 to 40% of the public will be of a migrant background. And that could be someone like me born in the UK, but also it could be people who are coming over. Now, when you have that kind of level of change, then you have to understand what diversity really is. It doesn't then become a nice to have, it then becomes business essential. Because if you have people from various different cultures and communities, or if they come from in geographical pockets, can often then be the majority, then if you don't understand that group from a business or regulatory or government or whatever educational kind of perspective, then how will you be able to serve them, or how will you be able to actually make money from them? So in that sense, for me, diversity has gone beyond the nice to have. The nice to have is essential and should have, and it's all about inclusivity, etc. But alongside that, from a business point of view, if you don't understand demographic change, then what are you going to deliver? And you can see that everywhere we go. And that's why people are doing, if you're the English Cricket Board or whoever it is, the reason why you're interested in diversity is, one, yes, inclusivity is very important, incredibly important to them, but also they have lots of Asian, African, Caribbean or whatever fans who of the sport, players of the sport, but fans of the sport, and to engage them and to say that you're equal to us and to understand them, then they have to reach out to them. And the only way you can do that is to do as the things that Abid and Rachel said, is actually understand people, understand intersectionalities as well, but then to focus on what that means to you, your business, or whatever you're offering. And that's why I think we need to understand diversity. Yes, it's a nice to have, but more importantly, we'll be dinosaurs and we'll be knocked out of business if we don't understand and target the groups that we're relating to.
Yeah, and that commercial aspect's so fascinating. I've been lucky enough to spend Ramadan in the UAE for the last 2 or 3 years, and it is a celebration the whole time. You know, you go into the shops, they're all geared up. You know, the money that's being spent during that time is incredible. And so here in the UK, I read the other day that it's upwards of 200 million that is spent during Ramadan. And if businesses are not catering for that, they're leaving money on the table, right?
Well, yeah, and charities in particular are incredible. You know, over 100 million will be donated by British Muslims in this 1 month. And so businesses that are catered around that. So, you know, I've had a few Muslim businesses that have spoken, or non businesses that have talked to me about how do we target particular groups. And I'll say, you find the Muslim, say, one business asked me last year, you know, should I sponsor, what should I do? And I said, well, look, you know, on the Islam channel, which is probably, you know, there are lots of different channels, but it's probably, I know from Barb data, it's the most watched Muslim channel of all the Muslim channels. If you sponsor the call to prayer at the time of breaking and starting your fast, then you're going to get, the chances are you're going to get some eyeballs on your product. So therefore, if you're relating to that organization, then if you're relating to that community, then you can get to them by sponsoring something on that channel. Now, I'm not using that channel as the best example, but I'm saying that if you think about it like that from a business case, for whatever the faith is, then you're going to be able to reach people, but you're only going to know that if you have that kind of knowledge or access to that knowledge. Yeah, no, I think that's so important. And I think, you know, that plays into maybe hearing a little bit more about the British Asian business community, Abid. I think, you know, in terms of the intersectional approach that you've taken, obviously it's Ramadan right now, but you are taking the approach that you're celebrating all religious festivals because of the community that you have coming along.
Absolutely. And as Akil says, you know, the word diversity is just really a word. What does actually diversity mean to many organizations? And I think once you ask the question to organizations, they do struggle to answer it. It's a very nice word to have on their website and in their bio, but do they actually understand it? And to understand it, you've got to recruit and engage with people of the ethnic groups, because they will give you a full understanding of what's needed within that particular group. But with the IoD group, we will be celebrating, and we are celebrating all faiths. Yes, currently it's Ramadan, but we are planning on doing events for Diwali, for Vaisakhi, and cater for all Asian businesses, irrespective of their faith. The ethnic minorities play a huge part in the UK economy, and I feel it's very, very important that they are represented and that their needs are catered for. It's not always about giving them a voice. It's about giving them an appreciation sometimes. You know, we're not always the victims. Sometimes a bit of appreciation and a bit of applaud goes a long way. So yeah, we're approaching it from that view, and I would say it's still a learning process. You know, we are trial and erroring. I do feel sometimes, being Asians, we can be quick to play victim as well, and I think we have a responsibility to be a bit more forthcoming and educate people as well about how things should be. And I've had this comment from a few people, you know, who are of non-Asian background, who've said that, you know, you seem like a good chap, but sometimes we are afraid of saying the wrong thing or offending people. So I think, you know, as Asians, sometimes we can be quick to play victim, and we almost expect the non-Asians to know how to treat people of color. And I think there we need a bit more education, where, you know, if we don't educate, or if we don't have groups like this and sessions like this, how are people expected to know how to, you know, how to do certain things?
So you're an employer and you've got people on your team. What are some of the things that you're doing right now in terms of your practices?
Well, we have flexi working because I'm a flexi worker myself. I stay awake all night and I sleep after the morning prayer and I wake up at midday. So if I'm doing that, I can't expect my team to do anything different. So I've left it, and it's like this. I mean, I've been in business now for 22 years. It's been the same all the way through. Get your job done. I don't care when you do it, but just get it done. And you know what? It works very well. And I think they appreciate that we appreciate it's Ramadan. And funnily enough, the ones that are non-Muslims have actually stepped up to the mark and kind of taken the burden off the Muslim workers as well, which I think has been amazing. But it's because of the culture we've adopted in the organization. And it's all about creating a culture in your workplace and making everyone feel loved and welcome, because that's when you get the best out of them. So when you've got such a workplace where you do, it's not only Ramadan, but if it's, we have a lot of Hindu workers. So when it's Diwali, we'll be giving them extra privileges, extra time off or extra time to do what they need to do. And at that point, the Muslims will step in. So rather than working against each other, we've kind of managed to create a workforce where it's all inclusive and they're there to support each other. If I wake up every day at 12 o'clock and I expect my staff to be in work at 7, 8 o'clock, then that's unrealistic. It's just not going to happen. I've sent out a massive email. Do not email me before midday. I'm not interested. And it's a bit of banter as well, but thankfully we have a fantastic environment where they love coming to work.
Yeah. So that idea of organizational culture and then the leaders, how they're acting and role modeling is a critical element of getting some of this right. So thank you for sharing that. Rachel, anything that you would build in there, and specifically to Ramadan, around some of the best practices?
Absolutely. And to build on everything Akil and Abid have said, there's clearly business benefits here on a number of levels. Akil talked a lot there about customers and audiences and users, and how we can service users, that is, and how we can better serve them. But if we think internally within the organization, and Abid's illustration there does show this really, really strongly, that from an employer perspective, the benefit is around engagement, people feeling they can contribute more fully, that their beliefs are understood and accounted for. Just means that employees will perform better, they'll be more engaged, they'll stay longer in their roles. You get all that, what we call in HR terms discretionary effort, where people just will go that bit further for each other, like Abid said, as well as for the business. There's lots of examples of how we can foster that and encourage that within organizations. I think maybe before moving on to that, just a nod, because we haven't spoken about sort of the compliance element, and that's not an exciting place to dwell, but I think as we all know on the call, from an employer perspective, there's a legal imperative here to meet the requirements of the Equality Act 2010, and that means it's unlawful to discriminate against anyone because of their religion or belief, or even because of a lack of religion or belief. So let's just state that. There's plenty of information online about compliance, but what we're all talking about on the call is actually going way beyond a level of compliance into a much more proactive space as an employer, where we're accounting for, celebrating and supporting difference in the workplace. So I've got lots of examples for how to do that. I was sort of saving them up to the end, but shall I give you a few now?
Yeah, I think we can get into that now, and also I know I want to bring Akil in at some point as well, because I think you were managing big teams when you were at the BBC and Channel 4, so I think you'll definitely have some examples of what you did as a leader as well. But Rachel, maybe talk to us a little bit about some of the case studies around companies that are doing this really well right now in terms of how they approach the topic.
Sure, yeah. The first thing to say is that the best organisations that we work with, they keep a very open dialogue with employees around religion and belief. So they're doing the groundwork, they're doing the thinking, and they're recognising, I think really importantly, recognising that they won't always get this right. employees don't expect their employers to always get it right. They just expect them to be making an effort in the right direction and learning, and showing, I guess, showing that vulnerability when it's required, that actually we don't always get diversity and inclusion right, but we have to all be making that effort. So the best organisations have done that groundwork. They understand the basics. For example, that different religions celebrate at different times of the year in different ways, and that colleagues may want time off to be with their friends and families, and the policies that they develop take account of that. So, I mean, policies, maybe that's a good place to start with some examples. So we work with organisations on developing whole suites of policies around diversity and inclusion. So a diversity and inclusion policy on its own, grievance policies that reference diversity and inclusion, flexible working policies, that whole, all your HR policies is a whole suite of them. Now, you could have a standalone religion and belief policy, and some of our clients do, but actually I think really great practice is to look at your suite of policies through the lens of religion and belief, and are they supporting individuals from that perspective? I think one of my tips would be to ensure that you're speaking to people in your business about those policies. You're not just going off and creating them in a vacuum. Lots of organisations will have employee networks or employee resource groups, some with a focus on religion and belief, or more generally D&I resource groups. Talk to those groups about your policies, consult with them, because I think it's through speaking to the employees who hold these beliefs and observe different religions that we get this right. And another example of that would be around comms, internally and externally. I'm sure we've all been in organisations and seen organisations make comms fails on different D&I topics. The way of not falling into that trap is really quite simple. It's speak to the people in your business about their beliefs and their religions, and then you'll get it right. Going off and doing it on your own and not sense checking is where you run into difficulties. So Definitely. I think that's two things.
Yeah, I think maybe just to pick up on that comms element, actually, because again, Akil, I'm privileged because I've heard some of these stories already before, so that's why I'm going to pick on Akil, because he was telling me about sometimes that you would write comms to go out within, I think it was the BBC potentially. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, you've got to own it, haven't you? I used to always get asked to write kind of, Ramadan Mubarak or Diwali or Easter kind of messages on behalf of the Director General, and depending on who that Director General was, I used to, in the end, I kind of like did the thing that no senior executive should do, but I just said, just write it yourself, because by the time it was watered down, it made no point. And I think that if you're going to do something, you do it properly, and you have to start as well. And I think it's really important to know when to start. So when I was the head of religion at the BBC, I did a couple for the staff. I did the first kind of, Ramadan or Eid part, celebrations, or Diwali celebrations, Vaisakhi celebrations, etc. And I remember with one of them, I think about 5 people turned up. And one of them was the head of radio for the whole of the BBC. And Helen, bless her, it was lovely, Helen Bowden. I mean, she did say to me, she said, look, when we started the kind of women in film and television and radio type work 20, 30 years ago, this is what it was like. So you do have to start somewhere. And when you start somewhere, and then, you book them and they will come eventually. And we have to keep at it. Now, whether they do things still now, but whether they do the things that we did then, and whether the growth is there, I don't know. But you do have to be brave, and you do have to, do things for your staff, wherever they may be. But also, I think you have to do it properly, and you can't take the religion out of it for fear of offending people. Because if I write something about Easter, etc., or Ramadan or whatever, and then you start taking this out, let's take the religiosity out because it might offend, or it may be, there's no point doing it. I think do it properly, or don't do it at all, because then we get sucked into the happy holidays rubbish. And happy holidays doesn't mean anything to anybody. People feel empowered, and they feel welcomed and important if they're taken seriously. So if you look at the Christmas lights, you know, which they're having Piccadilly Circus this year, which have it's not that much that are saying Happy Ramadan or Ramadan Mubarak. That has had huge impact on people. If you just had a crescent and a star and but no mention of Eid or Ramadan or whatever, then would it have meant anything? And I think some of the hoo-ha that you've seen from some of the right-wing voices, that kind of like illustrates just how out of touch they are. Because if you live in Birmingham or Bradford or places like that, we've been having I lived in Birmingham 30 years ago, and they've had things like Diwali and Vaisakhi lights in Birmingham and Leicester and places like that for decades. And it's all about inclusivity. So it's about time we have it for all. And actually, can you imagine just how many, the young person who now sees that, who may be a Muslim or even a non-Muslim, who sees those Ramadan Mubarak lights on Piccadilly Circus or wherever they are, they're going to basically think that they're included. Now, the backstory to all of this is the building that they're attached to, the Trocadero, is actually owned by a Muslim family. And that's probably one of the reasons why it happens. So therefore, there's a lot that's demographics again. That's that business thing again. Things happen when you can be in control of things, but they also happen when you treat people equally.
Yeah, definitely. I think that idea of perseverance and starting small but committing to it is such an important message. I know that, you know, often we would start some network or interest groups when I was working in the corporate world, and sometimes only 10 people would show up. And you're like, oh, you know, is it worth it? It's always worth it. Because those 10 people actually appreciated it. They had a safe space to come to. They were able to share what was going on for them. And eventually they would, you know, it was like, you know, a cumulative effect. When people see that you're taking it seriously, that you want to listen and you want to act upon it, then of course, then they will continue to come along, and that's when you can start to make real change. And the lights look fantastic at Piccadilly. I'd love to see them in person. It was really nice to see that plastered all over LinkedIn, people celebrating the fact that it's there. And it's interesting because, you know, when you think about Christmas, you know, it's a 2-week festival, and, you know, we go to town, don't we, in terms of, you know, celebrating that, and, you know, wonderful to maybe see that evolve with the likes of Ramadan as well. So that's brilliant. I'd like to invite any of our guests who are listening in today, you know, if there's any questions that are coming up for you, or any points that you'd like to make. Maybe you have an experience that you'd like to share with the panel that they can respond to in terms of how you've experienced Ramadan in the workplace. You know, please feel free to raise your hand. I think we can take you off mute. Catherine will tell me if we can't. Yes, we can, definitely. But again, if you feel like you want to answer one of the, put your questions into the chat box, of course, then I'll pay attention to that as well. So I think that in terms of those practical steps, you know, we talked about some of the policies that can be looked at. We talked about communications. You know, when we think about the practices, you know, within the workplace, Rachel, have you got any examples of clients that have done this really well in terms of accommodations that have been made in terms of working practices?
Yeah, sure. Just before I dive into that, I think I'll just quickly say that I think the starting point for organisations when they're thinking about this work is actually to understand the profile of their own employees. So this is more Akhil's favourite area, but you know, your workforce demographics. So before you can think through what steps you're going to take to include people, you need to understand what your employee demographics are. So survey. And most organisations are doing this, but you may need to extend your survey so that it covers religion and faith. And I'm happy to share with anybody on this call who'd like it some sample survey questions. So once you understand that, then yes, you can start making some adjustments to working practices, which will include everybody on the basis of faith and religion. So we've got a client who's focusing on this at the moment, and they're thinking about things like flexible, Abid's already spoken about this, flexible working, obviously really important to accommodate religious practices, whether that's around times of day or chunks of time to accommodate religious holidays, allowing employees to schedule in time for prayer and providing a physical space to do that. So we've got one organisation that have set up a number of different spaces within their their offices in London to accommodate different religious needs, as well as a separate space just for well-being and quiet. So spaces are really important. Obviously a lot of us are working in a hybrid way at the moment, but increasingly going back into the office. And I think as well as the separate space, organisations that we work with who are doing this really well are thinking about the communal spaces as well. Obviously Ramadan, this plays out particularly potently. So how are we thinking about how and where food is being prepared and consumed in communal spaces, so that we can account for everybody's needs? Food obviously is always a big topic when it comes to religion. So making sure work events are inclusive and having a kind of a practice around that with regards to food, and the basic things I'm sure lots of people will already be doing around providing non-alcoholic drinks. Labeling food is good practice as well, in terms of inclusivity. What else have I got here? Freedom to wear religious garments. Lots of organisations still have dress codes. Has anybody looked at those recently and blown the dust off them to check whether they're future proofed and they account for different people's needs? That's just a starter for 10 in terms of steps. But I'm conscious of time, but I just don't want to leave this call without talking specifically about the need to work with managers and HR leaders in this space. They are holding the keys to all of these conversations with individual staff members about their needs, and I think training them, equipping them, building their confidence so that they know how to appropriately respond and sensitively respond to individuals in a given moment is absolutely critical. So as well as the policies and the sort of cultural steps that you can take, I think there's a bigger overarching piece that organisations would be wise to think about, which is equipping managers and HR leads.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A real important aspect to highlight there, because they, as you say, they are the linchpin to making this work. All the policies and practices can be in place, but if those managers are not embracing them, if they're not aware of them, then it kind of falls down. So thank you for sharing that. Akil, any final points that you'd like to make? I know, as I said earlier, you manage big teams when you're at the BBC and Channel 4. Is there anything that you learned or mistakes that you may have made during that time that you'd consider sharing?
Yeah, one of the things that I remember, when I was at Channel 4, it's a long time ago now, but I was at Channel 4 and the cleaners, it was during Ramadan, I was fasting, and I remember chatting to a lot of African cleaners, right? It just so happened to be the case. And one of the guys, Mo, and I used to chat quite a bit. And I just simply said, he asked me how Ramadan was, and I told him, yeah, fine, etc. And I said to him, where'd you all break your fast then? Because you're working during that time. And he said that they just break the fast in the changing room, in the toilets where they got changed. And I never thought, that's just ridiculous. And I knew Channel 4 would be going to Rachel's point. I knew that if I mentioned that to my chief exec or to the HR people, they'd probably be horrified and hurt. So I did mention it to the head of HR, and she was horrified and hurt. And so we got a room, and we found a room for them, and actually I remember on that first day I went out and bought some dates, etc. for as well, and drinks out of my own pocket, I'd like to add. And we just had a bit of an event, and then they would, when we did a communal prayer, and they would call me sheikh and all this stuff and saying, can you do the prayers? And I said, look, I'm the worst person to do this, I'm not very good, I'm sure you're better at it. But that moment onwards was an amazing thing for them, because they probably felt that they were quite in the hierarchy, in the scheme of things, they were quite low in a broadcaster like Channel 4. They were the cleaners, people who moved things around, etc. And after that, I was they treated me like royalty. I remember going back a few years later, and he kept calling me Akil sir, and they all came and literally there's like 2 or 3 of them were all over me. I only remember the then boss of Channel 4 saying, what's all that about? I said, it's a long story. And then one of my old colleagues said, oh, that's because Akil sorted them out a place to do the, break their fast. Now, that little thing can make a huge difference, but actually it only happens to one of Abid's points, it only happens if you have that knowledge. And one of the things that I've found in my work is that it's all right actually to not have the knowledge. If you don't have the knowledge, then you go out and seek it, because better than to go in there with your size 11s and make a mistake, you know, rather than shy away from it and then therefore not do anything and not try and address anything or talk about things, go out and get that knowledge, because either it will exist within your workforce, or it will exist, or you can bring it in from somewhere else. But if you don't do it, then you won't be reflecting the needs of your staff base. And I think once you understand that, then actually everything is really easy. There is no subject that you can't tackle, and there is no kind of thing that you can't do, you know. And I think, you know, it's people often get really embarrassed and don't want to shy in and don't want to step into this kind of territory. Just do it. But if you're scared, get some advice. And once you get that advice, it'll be fine, you know, because actually nobody's going to say that, you know, I mean, we've all been to Ramadan or events and had somebody, one of the bosses or even a government minister or whatever, make some terrible kind of faux pas in how they say assalamu alaikum or whatever. They can never get it right. And no one's insulted. They actually are more impressed that somebody made the effort. So that's what I would say. That's the one big learning that I've got over all my years. You know, I didn't know anything about Vaisakhi or Diwali. I knew a little bit. Having grown up in Bolton, I knew a bit about Diwali, but I lived in Birmingham. I knew a little bit about Vaisakhi, but I had friends who could kind of like really tell me.
Yeah.
And I think if you don't have them, find them. But I'm sure you'll find. But I think you'll probably, if you do, as Rachel said, know who your workforce is, you'll probably then know people who in your workforce can advise you, or if not, you can find them from outside.
Yeah. Yeah, broaden your network, broaden your circle of influence, and you'll learn more. And I think to a point, they've got Daniela calling in from Islamabad today, talking about cultural intelligence. You know, that ability to actually seek more knowledge and actively seek it can really help you, I think, in your approach to leadership and managing teams. So it's great to have Daniela on the call with us. There's a couple of points that I'm going to pick up on in the chat, but Abid, I'd just like to give you the final floor, I think, in terms of, again, any observations, you know, if you were to go back, you know, 20 years in your career and you had a manager around you and you wanted them to do something differently for you, what might it have been?
Well, first of all, as I could mention, the lights that have been turned on, for me, it was incredible. I'm 47 years old and I'm born in the UK. But honestly, when I seen them lights, I thought, wow, you know what? They've actually finally recognized Ramadan. And I think for many Muslims, you know, across the country, it would have been the same. Because at Christmas, as you correctly say, there's lights on everywhere, and we go to the ceremony for the light switching on, and it's London, in Birmingham, Manchester, everywhere. But Ramadan, it's normally just been local side streets, you know, we're in the Asian areas. I think it was huge. So whatever reason it was done for, fantastic, and you know, we do applaud it. And then Rachel's point about engagement, you know, just talk to people, find out what the best way is. Sometimes I think employers and employees can be overcautious, and that can kind of spoil everything. But just have conversations, regularly engage, and see, you know, what's required. Seek the knowledge, but you're only get the knowledge if you've got Asians or the right people in your circle. You won't learn it from books, and you won't learn it from watching other people. You've got to try and, you know, integrate the wider community into your inner circle, because that's where the ideas will flow from. What you may feel is, you know, is perfectly right may slightly be offensive. So you need somebody from within. And then Akhil's example, you know, of a simple question and a simple, you know, request, which led to something amazing. I think there's loads of examples like this. I think people just need to have the guts to ask the question and not be shy about it. As I say, I'm a British-born Asian, and I've been fasting since the age of 6, 7. And particularly in Ramadan, you know, we've had football practice, we've had boxing. There was a time where I would be sparring at the time of the fast opening. So I'd stop punching, run outside, have a date, have a drink, back in the ring again. And you know, the boxing club or the football club, they only recognize it because we educated them about it, and they weren't offended, and they weren't, you know, all set back. They were very accommodating. So I think the more conversation we have and the more we make it a norm, the more it will become norm.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that concept of curiosity is definitely something that's loud and clear, I think, in all of your messages, is whether that's seeking out new friends, new contacts, having the conversation and being brave enough to have the conversation with people, you'll take an awful lot away from it. I just want to go to some of the comments in the field. So Samantha shares an observation. She's a CEO who's also a Christian, and the staff survey showed that majority of the team say they have no faith whatsoever. And so she doesn't talk about her faith in the workplace, as doesn't want to be accused of pushing views onto others, although I'd be happy to share with others if they asked. It can be a difficult balance. I guess this is it's a personal decision, I think, isn't it, around whether you share that or not. I know one example I had of a really senior leader in my last organization who I knew was a devout Christian. And we talked about it often in terms of how he felt that he wasn't recognized in the workplace. And it took him, I would say, maybe 4 or 5 years before he started to talk about his faith in the workplace. I was constantly nudging him too, because I knew it was such an important part of his life. And I knew that there were other Christians in the workplace that would have appreciated a community, within the workplace. But interestingly, the thing that made him eventually share that was the culture. It was the fact that we were starting to talk about acceptance, tolerance, difference, the fact that everybody had a place within the workplace. And he took that first step to share. I remember the post that he put out on Yammer, and it was a really lovely moment that he felt comfortable first, and he had an outpouring. So things that, people don't always necessarily share that stuff within the demographics of a survey because they maybe don't feel comfortable to do so just yet. I think it takes brave leadership sometimes. I'm not saying you're not brave, Samantha, at all. That's not my intent. But sometimes that's what's needed for somebody to just put their head above the parapet sometimes. And I think it can sometimes...
You have to read the room as well. Sorry.
Yeah, please, Akhil. Yeah.
You have to read the room as well. I mean, I've worked for some... obviously being the first Muslim, and only Muslim, to be the head of religion at the BBC, I managed a team which was predominantly Christian or not religious, and it would have been wrong. Well, I know for a fact I would have lost most of the people if I'd gone in there all guns blazing talking about my particular faith or background with it. One, it wasn't relevant, but two, and that's the other thing as well, what's the relevance of why are you talking about it? Why is it important? It might be important if you, like Abid says, if your workforce is quite mixed and you're bringing in flexible working during Ramadan or giving people time off to spend with their family during Easter or Diwali or whatever. That's a different conversation. But why are you bringing it into the conversation is one thing. And secondly, depending on what your job is, what kind of impact can it have then? Because, I've worked for some real practicing Christians who were, Director General of the BBC, big boss, head of programming at Channel 4, etc. If they brought their religion into the conversation, it may have made it difficult for people in terms of some of the things that they were talking about. And I know for a fact for myself and for, say, Mark Thompson, who was a practicing Catholic, who was the CEO of Channel 4 and then the Director General of the BBC, that was often used against us. So I think you have to be very careful about why you're talking about it, and two, whether it's relevant or not. And if people want to have a conversation with you, brilliant, by all means. But actually, I think that's normally where it comes from, rather than you saying this is why I'm doing, this is what I believe, because one, it may not be relevant, and two, it may not be wanted.
I do think that if I could just jump in a little bit more on this, I think there's a huge opportunity for Samantha here in this example, because we haven't talked about leadership until this point, and we've only got a couple of minutes left. But, as you say, Akhil, if Samantha can find the right opportunity to talk about that facet of her identity, irrespective of whether the rest of the team have religion or faith that they want to talk about, it may then lead to other people feeling more able to talk about other aspects of their identity, whether that's sexual orientation or hidden disabilities. So I think the leaders have a really key role to play here in getting the conversation going, and showing that they also are human beings with different elements to their identity.
Definitely. So I'm conscious that we're coming to the close in our time together. I guess maybe just in terms of a roundup of what I've heard, it's been such a fantastic conversation. And my thanks go out to Rachel, Abid and Akil for being so open and sharing so honestly in terms of their experiences. I think that knowing your audience is one of the key themes I think that I picked up. Knowing your demographic, knowing your community, I think is one of the key things to kickstart this conversation. And whether that means, doing a survey, whether it means, reading the room in a more appropriate way, I think if you know who you're trying to reach, then I think that's a great starting point. I think the other thing that I heard was really around, of course, the practices that exist within your organizations, paying attention to the policies, the way that you let people come and go from an organization. Performance over presenteeism is probably one of the key things that I picked up on, I think, from Abid in terms of, your working practices there. But use your workforce to design those practices. Don't do it in isolation, I think was a great point that I heard from Rachel there. The other thing that I think that's come through loud and clear is being brave. I think, Akil, that was something that really resonated for me, is stepping into the conversation, owning the conversation, not trying to dilute the conversation, so that you can really get to the heart and understand and be educated by the people around you. And doing that by having this broad and diverse network. And my goodness, if you're going to choose somewhere to go, LinkedIn, the IoD, that's the intent of these types of communities, is to reach out to people that may be a little different from you and have a conversation. I think that's a really valuable point. I've got 3 minutes left, so I think that I'm going to give each of my co-panelists an opportunity just to, the one thing that you want to get across as a final message, and then we'll say goodbye to everybody. So, Abid, any final thoughts?
Be brave and engage. Be brave and engage. Engage, understand. Don't dictate, don't enforce, but just let it be known that a mechanism is available should anybody wish to utilize it. Sometimes, if there is a mixture of faiths, then it can be a bit imposing. So just letting the people know that there is a mechanism in place, that we're not totally oblivious to it. We haven't disregarded it. There is a mechanism there. Should you wish to choose or engage, then there is something available for you.
Perfect. Be brave and engage. Akil?
Yeah, be inquisitive and own it, as it were. Yeah. And understand, as we've talked about at great length, understand who the people, understand what you're trying to achieve, and actually think about what success would look like, and then work backwards. And then you'll do the right thing, hopefully.
Perfect. And Rachel, final words to you. Oh, thank you. Well, I just think as a simple thing, just think about where the spotlight is going. We talked about Christmas. A lot of time and attention and focus gets put on Christmas. It doesn't mean we can't do that, but just think about where else at other points in the year you're shining that spotlight, and make sure there's balance. Fantastic. Well, it remains for me to say thank you so much to the panelists for giving up their time today. It's been a really, really fantastic conversation. It's been a real enjoyment for me to host this conversation with you. I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day, and for those of you who are celebrating Ramadan Kareem. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.